This is Christopher J. Finn, Boogie Rags by Night, with another chapter reading of The Stitches on the Stone, where last we left off, Benji got a little bit of an argument with his mom, went to see his friends, decided that there was something up with Mr. Tweedle, Larry, and he's going to go investigate. Or his friends, him and Mary, are going to go investigate at the expense of our boy Lucas. Janis is not slept. She's going to do some investigating of her own, and Edward is just doing Edward things. And given the opportunity to back out of whatever mess he's gotten himself into, even though he doesn't know what that mess is, he's going to continue on. So here we go. Chapter or November 4th, starting off with Benji. School let out at 3 p.m., leaving 2 hours before the planned meeting outside Tweedle's restaurant. Mary suggested they go in with the geezers, citing the geriatric happy hour between 5 and 6 p.m. would be the ideal cover. Plus, she added, early bird specials are cheap. He wondered if two teens sitting among the town seniors had the incognito appearance she was shooting for, and decided it was all for good. Tweedle needed to see him, and he wanted the old fart to understand who was watching whom. Benji turned left onto Woods Avenue from Liberty High, rode for a quarter mile, then trucked up Stevens Street. He gazed across the unkempt grass-covered lot on the west side of the Commons, hoping to see a deer or a congress of turkeys. It was a little early in the afternoon for either, but it kept his mind clear while riding to his mother's store. The school clocked in under a mile from Benji's home, but it was a mile opposite the smokery. It'd take a good half hour of hard riding, something his mother advised against, suggesting the sight and smell of a sweaty teen wasn't the smokery's best image. He argued the scent didn't matter since the whole store stank like an ashtray, and a towel would fix most of his appearance issues. Besides, it was barely in the 40s. He'd be lucky if he could feel his face when he walked through the door. Benji eased his speed once he turned right onto Atlantic Avenue. Traffic rolled steadily by, and there were few sidewalks he could ride on. He kept to the street, jumped curbs when he could, and kept a watchful eye on the approaching traffic. Once on Main, Benji slowed to a comfortable glide, letting gravity do most of his work. He zipped between parked cars, hopped off curbs, and bunny hopped. That's a wheelie and a hop off the back tire, for those who don't know. Back on. Benji avoided the municipal masses as best he could, hitting lawns, sidewalks, and alleys as needed. Most of the people he passed were strangers and wouldn't cause any trouble. However, those who frequented Stackhouse Sam's smokery had no issue tossing Benji under the bus when rough riding interfered with the steady flow of foot traffic. He wasn't Kenny May, after all. Accidents did happen. Retail stores lined both sides of the streets and began around the 10th block of Main Street, roughly 8 blocks away from the smokery. Sidewalks became exponentially more crowded during the week, so Benji typically cut down 8th Street and turned right onto Magnolia Avenue, which ran parallel to Main. He passed a few building yards, a few junkyards, and the city's impound yard. Magnolia was pointedly construction-oriented, more so than anywhere else in Lauredale. Hardware was Magnolia Avenue's retail, and storage covered a good portion of the east section of the road. Benji slowed, then braked. Across the street, leaving McRory's Hardware, was the infamous Pirate Menzies. He was dressed in jeans and a heavy orange overcoat. His hair wasn't pasted to his scalp. Instead, it seemed to float in the Midwest windstorm, a weekly event plaguing those who suffered through the Midwest's odd, changing weather. He looked different, almost dad-like, but it was him. He pulled a handcart loaded with lumber and various tools and hardware, though most were too small to identify from his vantage point. Pulling might have been an exaggeration. It looked more like looked more like a desperate battle to keep the handcart from abhorrently plowing. Oh, hang on, I got a page stuck here. Intermission. Okay, and back to it. Into the oncoming traffic. The load would test the truck's weight limitations. Benji shook his head, checked the traffic, and pedaled over to Ed's side. Yar, matey! Benji said with a bit more cheese in his tone than he intended. He slowed as Ed planted both feet hard against the concrete and slid to a steady halt. Cigar kid, right? Yep, Benji. He glanced at Edward's haul. He saw bolts, bits, 2x4s, 4x4s, and enough nails to build an ark. You building a ship or something? Kid, maybe we can lighten up on the pirate jokes, he asked. Benji chuckled and happily agreed. Ed wiped his brow with a cloth he pulled from his pocket. No, but after yesterday, I had to do something to keep busy. This shit's for the basement. Looks like you could use a hand. That's one hell of a load. Yeah, no doubt. He turned to Benji. I suppose I could have taken a car, but I don't think all this would fit. Besides, I can't find the goddamn keys, Edward laughed. I'm not sure I remember how to drive, honestly. I guess I'm still recovering from the other day. He turned away, huffed, then appeared to inspect the cart. You rent this thing? Benji asked. The cart looked like a cross between a radio flyer wagon and the ass end of a pickup truck. The tires were half the size of a small car, and the sidebars slipped into the red metal frame. McRory's hardware was painted on both sides of the sidebar and body. The axles were sturdy and didn't appear strained under the weight of the lengths of wood stacked 4 on 4. The hardware sat in paper bags between rolled lengths of rebar. I suppose I could use a hand. Hell, this is my 7th trip today. I'm a bit spent. I bet, Benji replied, then hopped from his seat and gestured towards the cart. Ed nodded, and he tossed the bike on top of the wood. It's a dirt bike. They don't weigh much, he assured, and then walked to the back of the wagon. Hang on. That bag, the one nearest you, Ed pointed to his left. No, the other one. Look inside. There should be a rope tied to the hook back there. You'll have to go under the 2x4s to see it. Benji retrieved the length of rope, bent, and did indeed see a small metal hook welded to the back of the wagon. He tied a quick hitching knot, crawled beneath the boards, and attached the rope. It's good, go for it, he instructed. Ed eased his foothold, and Benji tensed. Then the two began a slow, easy descent down the remainder of the hill. Gets better a block or two up. My street's just up there. Benji grunted it in agreement. He cycled his grip on the rope and thanked the gods in heaven for his winter gloves. His hands would be a right mess without him, as Magnolia had more of a decline to it than any other street in Lauredale. As promised, the hill turned valley, and the two switched jobs. Pushing seemed a bit easier, and he was thankful to see Edward was having as much a go at pulling as he did when slowing the cart's descent. Soon the two silently turned onto Abbott Street, down the cul-de-sac to Ed's home. He heaved one final push up the drive, and both he and Ed collapsed into the driveway. Man, Edward began between breaths, I don't think I would have made it this round. Good thing you came along, Sarkar boy. Yar, happy to help, Benji said, and raised a crooked finger. Both let out a chuckle. I'll get some cash for you. Least I can do, unless... You want help bringing this to the basement? Benji asked. Ed's eye grew wide as he nodded. If I have to pick up another damn 2x4, I think my balls will split. Benji laughed. No problem. Besides, I'm too tired to carry you to the hospital. Right, Ed said as he rose and brushed off his pants. He pulled open the garage door, then thumbed over his shoulder. Don't scratch the bends. Ben tilted his head, which didn't offer a better view, but, appearance is everything these days. He was surprised to see a deep brown Mercedes SL convertible collecting dust in an otherwise empty garage. He was also surprised to find Ed had no electric door opener. Hell, not even a tool bench. Just pristine painted concrete and bare walls in a home built for the wealthy. It's through here, Ed stated. He lifted 2 paper bags and walked to the door against the far left wall. You'll have to kind of finesse your way down, but don't worry if you scratch the molding. I did. Ed disappeared inside. Surprised there's any of it left. Benji hefted 2 boards on his shoulder and followed, pausing at the door. The staircase descending along the garage wall was far too narrow for what he was about to attempt. Torn drywall above the handrail suggested the entry was far too tight for whatever Ed had tried throughout the day. Well, if Ed didn't care, then he didn't care. Something bothered Benji, but he couldn't put his finger on it. Maybe it was how the shadows hung on or the wet puffs of air seeping through the door like a thick breathing fog. Like I said, Ed stated, finesse. He flipped on the light switch and the fog dissipated. Here, give me that end. Edward pulled the 2x4s to him, and Benji walked to the opposite end. Maybe together, right? Everything's better together. I think my mom said that. Right, Benji affirmed. After you. He suddenly wanted very little to do with this operation. Ed pulled, and Benji did his best to keep the length of the 2x4 from brushing against the door's molding, and the two eventually made it to the basement. Ed instructed him to leave the boards on the stairs, stating it was impossible to turn the corner around the railing. Benji nodded his compliance and then stepped onto the floor. What he saw surprised him. Edward stated he had been to McCrory's on several occasions. Looking at his basement, Benji had no doubt this was true. Sawdust, bits of cut wood, and shards of rebar all littered the floor from one end of this expansive basement to the other. Frames in the shape of kennels lined the wall to the left, chalked outlines to the right. 2x4s outlining a third set in the center, creating a small corridor between them. A mix of wood and rebar made the vertical walls, where horizontal planks held vertical metal bars in 8-inch spaces and were tied into the rafters above. What is all this? Benji asked. He instinctively tugged on the nearest metal bar, then wrapped his knuckles on the adjacent wood. No idea, Ed replied. He inspected the work in an almost dreamlike state, rubbing his chin. His eyes crossed the individual planks as if each was a crafted masterpiece. You ever just need to build something? Not really. It's sort of weird in a way. I don't even measure this stuff. It just comes to me. Ed moved to Benji's side, glanced at him, then sat on the stairs. I did eventually measure it. All of it. It's perfect. Down to the goddamn inch. So you're a carpenter? Ed shook his head. No, I don't think so. I had to buy all this shit, tools and such, and you saw the garage. You could eat off the floor. He pulled his wallet from his rear pocket and then tapped it on the rail. Nope, not a carpenter. As a matter of fact, I have no idea who I am, cigar boy. No idea at all. He ended the sentence as if singing, then pushed himself against the wall. But I sure am making something, aren't I? I am, right? Edward's basement of wonder. Benji fell silent and gauged the man sitting, no blocking his only way out of this, whatever the hell it was. He nodded, but otherwise remained as still as a ghost. Yeah, Ed continued and tapped the wallet again. You know, I searched through this house, tried to find family photos, a wife, a bill, mom and dad. He shook his head. I thought I'd have a phone book, maybe a Rolodex or something. I should have something here to remind me of who I am, shouldn't I? He asked. Benji shrugged. You know what I do have? Money. Lots and lots of money. I have enough green to last 2 lifetimes. He paused awkwardly. His eyes locked with Benji's, and a feeling of dread rolled through Benji like a tidal wave. I don't know where any of it came from. Don't know if I have a job. Kid, shouldn't I know what I do? These houses out here, they aren't like the rest of the town. This fucker has 6 bedrooms. 6! That Benz in the garage has 200 miles on it. What I'm saying is it's damn strange, get it? Amnesia? Benji offered in a pinch. God, his nerves were getting the better of him at a time when he needed to keep his shit together and beat feet. Ed placed both hands between his knees and looked to the ceiling. I suppose. I figured out the pirate thing too, in case you're interested. He sat up. You are interested, aren't you? Hell no, he wasn't interested. The only thing Benji wanted to do is get topside and pedal at warp speed in any direction away from here. Ed didn't move, and there wasn't enough space to speed by him. A foot, maybe less. Sure. Ed nodded. Halloween, my man. Think I mentioned that, didn't I? It's a big A-plus shindig in this hole of a town. You probably knew that too, didn't you? Benji again nodded. Of course you did. Edward tapped the wallet against his knee. Didn't say anything about it after those crazies jumped me, did you? Ed's eyes narrowed slightly. I figured you knew. Larry even asked you as much, Benji whimpered. He had to get out fast. Ed dropped his gaze, tapped the wallet once more, then returned it to his pocket. He brightened, stood, then beckoned Benji to him. Beckoned Benji to join him. There we go. Right. Look, kid, I'll get the rest of this. He cleared a path. Go on, get yourself home. Gonna be dark soon, and you shouldn't be out after dark. Ed glanced to the ceiling and quietly added, I don't think anybody should. Benji sped up the stairs, ran to the garage, and snatched his bike off the wagon. He spared a glance toward the back of the garage, wondering if he heard Edward mutter, At least not around me, or if he imagined it. Ed stood in the doorway with his arms crossed. Benji jumped on his bike, wheeled around, and pumped those pedals as if his life depended on it. The Six Women of the Stone. Petticoat Way, a sleepy little section of Lauderdale located south of Woods Avenue and east of the Posca condominiums complex in the Dilthey Street East District, housed a trio of single-family detached homes. These complexes that lined both sides of Petticoat Way were the Sweetwater Homes, the Trailhead East, and Boardwalk Central. Each complex held a variety of styles ranging from the Midwest single-story to two-story detached carriage houses. The colors were pale and discreet, the yards pristine, and the streets well-kept. Husbands worked steady 9-to-5 jobs, and the wives tended to the upkeep of the children, lifestyles, and family needs. It was the picturesque version of the American dream, at least in the 1950s patriarchal sense, not that anyone around town was asking. Sweetwater Homes, the first left off Petticoat Way, contained the majority of the single-family carriage houses, which were spaced to allow the illusion of privacy, yet close enough to say hello to the neighbor without shouting. Those choosing the caretaker positions, typically greeted, gathered, and shopped together during the mid-morning hours, leaving the complex empty. A light wind rustled through a pile of leaves stacked against the curb, lining an extensive common grounds the local children utilized for afternoon sports. Birds chirped and flitted between the bare branches of maple trees, 1 tree per home, and 12 inside the common ground play area. The sun cast sporadic shadows through the few stubborn maples refusing to shed their final stock of dying leaves. 2 small rabbits emerged beneath an evergreen bush meticulously shaped to resemble 3 joined spheres. Both sniffed the air, then carefully moved to the center of the yard. A loud, percussive snap caught their attention, and the rabbits stood tall and alert. They turned toward Petticoat Way, then followed the sound as it whipped along the rooftops in successive thwapping echoes. The sound repeated twice before a small object rolled down the center of the street and slowed before turning in a frantic circle when the expansion joints splitting 2 concrete slabs forced the gray stone flat. Its painted eyes peered into the blue sky of the morning, adding a tint of yellow against the red dot and blue splotch sitting above a stitched smile. A low drum of skin on metal pierced the morning air. The chattering birds launched into the air. The two rabbits quickly returned to their backyard burrows. The air thickened, and the wind slowed to a sibilant wheeze. A pale hand extended above a navy blue mailbox sitting on a sidewalk at the far left corner of the petticoat intersection. A second hand appeared at its side, painstakingly pulling the body of a trim woman to her feet. She kept her head low while her shoulders slowly rose then fell. Her translucent plastic windbreaker crackled with each movement of her arms. She slid the toe of her left foot forward, planting her heel firmly on the sidewalk. She lifted her head high, then flipped her matted hair to the side, revealing a soft face scarred with streaking mascara. She took a step and let go of the mailbox while wiping her hands against the pink cotton V-neck shirt she wore beneath the windbreaker. The frazzled woman leaned into her next step, forcing her feet to scrape forward while attempting to keep her body upright. She stepped, drifted right, then shifted her balance to the left while her arms crossed her waist like a pendulum. She continued like this until reaching the stone, where she fell to her knees and quietly chuckled. She didn't move, barely breathed, and stared into the rock's painted eyes as if hypnotized. A door opened to her right, and a blonde-haired woman dressed in a yellow print sundress and white flats slowly approached the stone. The dark-haired woman looked up at her, then acknowledged her, Tabitha, before turning her gaze downward. "Annabelle," Tabitha replied, "I see you found our path." She dropped to her heels and studied the stone, though neither moved to touch it. Tabitha smiled, greeting her old friend. Minutes passed before the sound of shuffling feet caught their attention. Another woman approached from their left, leaving the door to her home wide open. Her hair was pulled into a tight bun and shone auburn in the morning sun. She wore a white sweater beneath an apron decorated with a cartoon taco that's saying, "I don't want a taco" about it. She stood to Tabitha's left and Annabelle's right. "Who are you?" Annabelle asked hoarsely. "Doris. Doris Drake." "Mm-hmm." Annabelle nodded to Tabitha and introduced her. A fourth woman slid to a halt by the mailbox at the corner of the road. Her eyes sat within the shadow of a thick hood covering a ski mask. She spun twice before spotting the three women, then ran to their side with a large waffle-head meat tenderizer dangling off her right hand. Only Doris turned to greet her. "You?" she asked. "Susan Willow," she replied, her voice low, tortured, and gruff. She glanced at the stone, and the fabric around her mouth curled upward. A pair of fuzzy, furry boots caused the four to look away from the stone. They glared at this sneaky interloper, but remained silent. The woman adjusted her white knitted cap, then bent at the hip. "Beatrice," was all she said. The door from a home 1/2 block away burst open in a tremendous crack, knocking it loose off its hinges. A sixth woman, with hair as black as Annabelle's that was dripping with water, stepped onto the sidewalk. A bath towel was coiled around her dark breast and waist, covered with a knee-length black silk robe. She cautiously approached the other 5 women until the river rock pulled her attention toward it. She snorted, then built a slow chuckle into a cackling laugh that bounced off the surrounding homes. The 6 stood and circled the stone. The woman identified herself as Charlene. She pulled her hair from her eyes, then sniffled. She nodded to the group, then turned as if addressing the stone. The ground vibrated at their feet, and the river stone hopped and danced inside a circle the women instinctively formed around the stone. Each of the women stiffened in turn, relaxing after the stone settled quietly against the concrete. "So, what now? It hasn't said a word to me since Halloween," Tabitha asked. She looked to Annabelle for an answer. "I don't know," Annabelle replied. The pavement shifted suddenly, then dropped an inch. The women looked to one another in shock, eyes wide with wonder. Annabelle gasped, and she dropped both hands to her sides. Her pupils widened until the shade of brown turned black, then red, then blue. She smiled, then said with a laugh, "I'm its first." She spoke in a reverent, shaky pitch, focusing her gaze on the eerie eyes of the stone at her feet. Another tremor shook the six, and it was Tabitha who spoke next. "I'm her second." She looked to Annabel, who nodded with excitement. Doris announced she would be third, then Susan, then Charlene, until all eyes fell on Beatrice. She straightened her coat, stood tall, and took a deep breath. A low roar sounded, and the concrete slab dropped again, then again. Beatrice smiled, clapped, then cleared her throat. "I am the sixth woman of the stone." The ground opened with a growl and swallowed the group whole. They disappeared without a whisper. A fissure opened and snapped down the center of the road, ending past the third driveway from where they had just stood. Trees shook in the common ground. The maples shed the last of their leaves with a violent spasmodic shiver. The two rabbits emerged from their burrows and carefully stepped into the street. They peered into the gaping hole at the center of the road, sniffed, then returned to the front yard. They nibbled on grass for a time, occasionally relocating, periodically turning their heads towards the street. A bird cooed by the neighboring roof. Others flocked to the high perches of the common grounds, at ease and at peace. Janis. November 3rd had seen Janis and Madeline searching the grounds outside Lauredale's switchyard. They had argued as to the methodology of the expedition, yet both had agreed the river rock was essential to find. Neither knew why. They had continued to wander about the yard, slipping in and out of old abandoned rail cars. Bodies pushed to the brink of total exhaustion, both Janis and Madeline had returned to Janis's home after midnight. After some rest and a fresh pot of coffee, the two decided to map out a search grid. Janis slid the kitchen table into the study, and Madeline unrolled the map of Lauredale, securing both ends with salt and pepper shakers. Janis, meanwhile, had to coax her husband back into bed. She returned, glanced at the map, then marked the switchyard locations in the northeast quadrant of Lauredale. "Why do you always end up at the switchyard?" Madeline asked. "It's a ghostless graveyard chock full of bolts and bones." "Bolts and bones?" "You know what I mean, the shells of those old rail cars, all rusted and such. I don't think I ever seen a train roll by." "Not since the 1960s, Janis replied. "Not since the river trade dried up." "So why there?" "I don't know exactly," she replied honestly. Janis couldn't say, beyond a feeling deep in her gut, why she needed, and it was a need, want didn't play into her mindscape, to find the stone in the first place. Janis knew she and Madeline had changed somehow after their initial contact. Nothing drastic, at least not yet. So far, insomnia seemed to be the only real side effect. Still, if finding the rock meant she'd get a decent night's sleep, then it'd be 100% worth it. The stone was out there, beat under a car, in a sewer, and yes, even in one of those old abandoned rail cars, and by God, she was going to find it. I suppose it was a place to start, don't you agree? Madeline frowned, and Janis noticed she turned to the northeastern wall of her room, as the two had done moments after the rock rolled away from them like a clown riding a unicycle. Like Janis, Madeline didn't have a choice. "But it rolled to Dilthy," Madeline added quietly. She leaned over the map and placed a mark at the intersection of Davis Street and Dilthy Street East. "You realize it could be in some kid's sock drawer, don't you? For all we know, one of those Hoosier brats picked it up." Janis smirked. She raised both brows and crossed her arms, giving Madeline time to consider her words. She didn't have to remind Madeline what happened when someone held that stone. The clouded mind, oh, it was the stone. The clouded mind, the elapsed time, and the warmth within their loins. "Okay," she began at length. "Maybe not a kid." "My point exactly," Janis replied. "No one's going to hold on to that thing for more than a minute. We both know it." "So what then? How exactly do we discover where this stupid rock is?" "Damn it, Madeline, how the hell should I know?" "Let's just see where our feet take us." "Okay, Janis, okay," So where to next? Should we scour the blocks around here? Go downtown? Oh, I know. Why don't you wrap a rag around your eyes and let your feelings guide you? That'll lead us straight to it for sure. Janis ignored the sarcasm and turned her attention to the map. It might as well be a blank piece of paper for all the help it would do them. There wasn't a whole lot to the design of Loredal. One big old rectangle with a bunch of squares filling its center. No nougat, no caramel. One big block of flavorless candy. So, Janis decided to go with Madeline's suggestion and let her feelings guide them. They stepped into the cold of the early morning and began with a casual stroll in the community park behind the Posca condominiums, which Janis called home. She had a pleasant view of the west side of Posca Lake from her bedroom window and often spent her early mornings looking out over the water with coffee in hand. They walked the stone path leading from her back door and circled the lake on the right. Neither expected to find the stone during the walk. Both agreed that this, more than anything, was a needed distraction before the search began in earnest. After the lake, the two moved east, working in tandem on opposite sides of the road. They covered Dilthey Street East, Davis Street, and the east side of Woods Avenue. The afternoon saw the two on Atlantic Avenue, where the going was slow. Janis, who hadn't changed out of her pink jumpsuit, found the trip strenuous and feared her lack of hygiene might force the pair back home. Her legs burned, blisters formed on the side of her heels, and she was hard-pressed to find a restroom. They turned onto Daisy Street, a small side street consisting of single-story homes converted into business storefronts, photography studios, antique stores, and a bail bond or three that led them to Main Street, just west of City Hall. They paused in front of Loredal's only surviving audio-video store and took a seat on the curb. Janis rolled her sleeves to her elbows, then brushed her smooth, honey-blonde hair into her ponytail. Madeline leaned back on her elbows, closing her eyes to the afternoon sun. Janis lowered her head. She pressed her thumbs into the muscles along the back of her neck. She swallowed dryly and glanced at her friend. The futility of the past 2 days hit like an all-star batter. "Are you sure we're doing the right thing, Janis?" Madeline asked. Janis didn't see her sit up. She was lost in thought, asking herself the very same question. "I feel like we're in the stomping ground of a great beast with stakes in our pockets." "Where do you come up with this shit?" Janis asked. Madeline shrugged. "Comes natural." Janis coughed when an old Buick pulled up beside them and honked, blowing a cloud of exhaust over both their heads. A white-haired older woman pointed to the parking space they occupied, then revved the engine. Madeline offered her an extended middle finger, then nodded as the old Betty drove off. "I feel like we are, I guess. My body tells me we are. It sort of feels like I'm connected to an invisible leash, you know? Whatever is pulling these strings wanted us here, then over there. The more we look, the further it wants me to go and insists we are closing in. It's damn frustrating, though, because it won't tell me why. Mine just tells me to sit down." Madeline pulled her knees to her temples, then wrapped both hands around her head and began to groan. "I can do this without you, you know. You don't have to come with me." Yes, I did have to come with you, in point of fact, and you know good and well why, too." She raised a hand and pointed a finger towards the sky, keeping her head pressed against her knees. "I get the same creepy feelings you do. My body screams for sleep. Oh, I just want to take a nap," she said, paused for a moment, then added, "but I can't. I'm mind-fucked, just like you." She lifted her head. "Perpetual goddamn insomnia." She looked askance at Janis and asked, "You know what? I'm starving. Can't we get something to eat? I felt like we haven't eaten since yesterday, you know?" I don't think we have." Madeline peeked over the trunk of what looked like a white Toyota, then pointed. "We're on Main. We could go to Tweedle's place. It's not too far up." "Tweeds? I hate Tweeds. Food's like sucking on a salt lick." "Maybe it'll replenish all the sweat we lost walking around, you know? Electrolytes." "Madeline, it's barely 40 degrees outside." 110 in this thing," she said, plucking at the pockets of her down jacket. "Please," Madeline whined, while tapping both feet on the curb. "It's the best we got, and I'm not eating at Mickey D's. I'd rather starve." Don't I know it? She thought on this and then shrugged. Her body, which she was keenly focused on, didn't say not to go there. That's as right a place as any to discover something, wasn't it? Even if even if it only ended up being dinner. Sure, let's go. She checked her watch. It'd be close to 5 p.m. when we get there. Tweedle does an early bird special. At least I'll get a discounted Salt Lake. Madeline jumped to her feet, hooted, and looped an arm through Janis. Yes, I could eat a horse. Be careful what you wish for, Maddie, especially there, she mused. Come on, let's hoof it on over. I suppose I could use a break and a good stiff drink. Or 3, Madeline suggested. The two lazily strode along sidewalks with eyes opened, minds closed. Shadows stretched until the sun sank sleepily behind the western municipal buildings, leaving a pleasant mix of deepening oranges and red hues upon an ever-darkening sky. Janis slowed as Tweed's canopy peeked beyond the bulbous storefronts lining this section of downtown. She pointed, then raised a hand in front of Madeline, stopping her cold. A slight buzzing sensation tweaked at her stomach, something far beyond the pangs of hunger. Janis felt a sudden pull towards the front door, and she turned to Madeline, who had also paused to drink in the sensation. You're getting this, right? Janis whispered. Like a goddamn cowbell, Madeline replied. Janis turned in a slow, deliberate circle, checking the sidewalks and beneath the cars, then peeked into the nearby drainage sewer. No rock. When she backtracked, the tingle faded, so she returned to Madeline's side. Both women set their sights towards the ground, scouring every inch of the road and adjacent walks. They paid little mind to those window shopping, talking, or waiting for the local 802 Transit, Lauderdale's only bus system. They ignored the two children parking a pair of dirt bikes outside Tweeds, where a frazzled boy and an unusually dressed girl stepped inside. Benji. The soft orange glow of Tweeds did little to calm Benji's nerves. The mixed aroma of hickory and bacon, as well as the purposeful shuffle of the waitstaff clad in black and white, seemed to compound a sense of not right swimming around his head like a circling shark. Benji and Mary stood at the maitre d's pedestal, facing a young woman who couldn't have been more than 2 or 3 years Benji's senior. He thought he recognized her from high school, as recently as last year, though the tightly pulled bun of blonde hair and deep pasted eye makeup made it a challenge to be sure. She raised a single brow in condescending judgment. Her mannerisms grew more familiar by the moment, and asked, Just the two of you? Benji nodded. Lucas opted out when his mother dragged him away after the third bell, citing his cholesterol and sodium levels and something about a visiting aunt. Go figure. At least he handed Mary some money. Here, she questioned again, while inspecting Mary from head to toe. Well, yeah, here. Where the fuck else will we go? Mary retorted. You believe the nerve of this cut? Benji pulled her hands into his, stifling her angered response. She blushed, as did he. Okay, sorry, the hostess soothed, then pulled 2 menus from a side cart and led the two to their seats, far from the cluster of seniors scattered throughout the front of the restaurant. Bitch, Mary muttered under her breath. Her eyes narrowed as the hostess returned to her post. You look like you just stepped off a concert bus. What do you expect? Mary glanced at her clothing, which, per her norm, was a mix of black jeans with various cuts and slices, a tight spandex shirt, and white thermal underwear beneath a Nirvana t-shirt. Rather than stuffing her hair beneath a winter beanie, she opted for 2 tiny buns, giving her a very cat-like appearance. She shrugged. Gotta be me, right? Maybe a little less you, when we're trying to blend in, Benji suggested. I don't see Tweedle. Relax, Sherlock. We just got here. Let's just order something, she instructed, then raised her hands as if waiting for a teacher to call on her. A young man with a thick mop of dark hair cut in a highly obnoxious pompadour approach, smiled, then gripped Mary's outstretched arm with his index finger and thumb and lowered her hand to the table. Please, sugar, don't spook the natives. They tip for shit, but they do tip. Mary giggled. Stevie, I forgot you worked here. It's Stephen, and yes, I work here, as you well know. He placed his index finger against his slender, clean-shaven chin. The question is, what are you two doing here? Doesn't seem like you're kind of bang. What's that supposed to mean? Benji asked. Kids from the dive, Mary clarified. Shit, I'm not broke, Benji retorted. He was still annoyed with the Edward visit, and he couldn't shake the feeling something was amiss here in Lauradell, bordering on sinister. Oh, don't take offense, silly. It's a matter of taste, not class. He leaned in, looked over both shoulders, and said, You two are far classier than any of these old crones germinating in this second-rate eatery. He winked and stood tall. So, my lovelies, drinks? 2 Cokes, Mary said, and then waved him closer. She scanned both ends of the restaurant as he again leaned in. Is the old man about? You mean Tweedle? He's floating around here somewhere. Why? Don't tell me I've offended you already. It takes me 20 or 30 minutes to warm up. No, doofus, Tweedle's banging his mom. She thumbed at Benji. Hey, Benji complained. Oh, and here I thought today was going to be dull. Stephen knelt. Do tell. He thinks Tweedle's up to no good. In it to win it, you know? Stephen rolled his eyes. Where do you get these ghastly expressions? It's like I'm talking to a mongrel. Can we please stop talking about my mom? So this is what, reconnaissance? Stephen asked, ignoring Benji. Mary nodded. Wonderful! He tapped his finger to his bottom lip. Right. I'm going to get you 2 Snoopies something to drink. Salads? He paused, eyes narrowing slightly. You can actually pay for dinner, can't you? Mary lifted her left hand, wavering first to the left, then right, then shrugged. Stephen let out a long, exaggerated whistling wheeze, sealed his lips into a thin crack as if in thought, bounced on his heels, and nodded triumphantly. I'll be back, darlings. Don't go anywhere. He strolled to another table while Benji shot Mary a harsh glance. Oh, quit your worrying. It's all good, trust me. Look at this place, huh? Benji had little time to inspect his surroundings. Between Tweedle and the pirate, Mary, and now Stephen, his mind wouldn't allow a single thread of detail through the steam valve whistling in his mind. Still, she had a point. The hostess station sat next to a full-service bar as they entered, with the dining hall off to the left. The carpet was patterned in black and gold. All the wall paneling was cut from dark red maple or oak, all the more prominent with the orange glow of low-hung lights. They sat near the back of the restaurant, sitting a few yards from the kitchen's double doors. Pretty cool, Benji admitted. So he's why you wanted to come here, isn't he? Well, yes. I mean, Stevie's awesome. We hang out once in a while. She turned, cocked her head to the table Stephen was servicing, and smiled. Anyway, look, I'm sure he'll get Tweedle out here. Probably tell him we hated the food or something. Just go with it. Benji nodded hopefully. Then maybe you'll see what I'm talking about. Damn Skippy, and if I do, you better believe I'll create a scene the old bastard will never forget. Tweedle won't sniff around Mama Sammy anymore, not after we're through with him. Mary raised her hand above the table and smiled. Benji reluctantly slapped it, reasonably sure whatever she had planned wasn't going to spook the old bastard in the slightest. He wished he had come up with a plan of attack. His primary goal was to force Tweedle into the time-slowing display he witnessed in his dining room. He needed her to see it for what it was, but honestly, did Benji even know what it was? Could he point to the old bastard and say, That's it! That's what he did! He didn't think so. The memory of the morning in question had faded quickly. By the time school ended, Benji had wondered if what he saw wasn't a figment his mind had concocted to chase back a hidden desire for recompense. The only thing Benji was sure of was Tweedle's attempt to slip through life's back door without so much as a knock. Screw him. He deserved what's coming, whatever it might be. What the hell am I supposed to say to him? Benji asked. Before Mary could answer, Stephen returned to the table, arm in arm with a white-haired older woman who could have been a dead ringer for Queen Elizabeth. The old woman stood at a stoic 5 feet 3 inches in heels, wearing a pleasant floral print skirt with a matching blouse, cloche, and brooch. Kids, this is Monica Reynolds, one of the absolute sweetest ladies you will ever meet. Mary and Benji waved a greeting. She smiled. Oh, bless your hearts, Monica began in a timid, mouse-like voice. She pulled Stephen's hand into her own. Benji looked to Mary, then Monica, then Stephen, noting a rather odd expression of sorrow and sympathy mixed between the three. Monica handed Benji 2 $20 bills. He gasped and widened his eyes in both horror and shock, moving his hand towards Monica as if he was holding a snake. Stephen abruptly cut in, saying, "I was telling Monica of Tweeds' outreach program for the troubled youth, and your tragic story came up." "Tragic?" Benji asked. "That is so sweet of you," Mary complimented. Benji cocked his head in a daze of confusion. "Oh, I don't want to bother her with the details of your loss and hardships. Only a brother and a sister fighting to fend for themselves." He pitched a hand to his chest. "It touches one's heart, doesn't it?" Monica agreed, and Benji thought she curtsied. "You two have a nice dinner, and I'll not take no as an answer. Understood?" Benji watched as his friend raised her hand to her lips and nodded gratefully. His mouth fell open. Monica folded Benji's fingers around the money, then touched a gloved hand to his cheek. He was feeling faint. "Mary, is it?" she asked, and Mary nodded. Get yourself some nice clothing, dear. You're far too pretty for scraps and rags. Pay a visit to Luann's boutique over on 13th Street. You know the one?" "Oh my God, yes," Mary clapped, and Stephen turned and brought a hand to his lips, stifling a laugh. "I love the clothing in there, so elegant." "Yes," Monica agreed. "Lulu's a good friend of mine. You tell her I sent you, and she will take excellent care of you. I'll make sure she knows to send me the bill." "That is the nicest thing anyone has ever done for me," Mary replied, cupping both hands to her chest. "Thank you so much. I don't know how I'll ever repay you. It's been so hard after—" She cut herself off while drying her left eye. Benji kicked her shin. "Pish posh. This is Lauradale, dearie, and we take care of our own here in Missouri. Enjoy your meal," she sang sweetly, then slowly shuffled back to her table. "And there's dinner," Stephen chirped happily. "You're going to hell," Mary teased. "Me? Nonsense. That old gal loves spending her money," he said, prolonging the words love. "I see her everywhere. Spend, spend, spend. Those 220s, pennies in a bucket. And besides, look at her." All turned to see Monica bow her head slightly, moving a hand over her heart. "She'll talk about this for a year. You two probably saved her life. Now, you little downtrodden little troglodytes, what can dear sweet Monica buy for you? Lobster? Steak?" "Hell yeah, steak. Stick it and serve it bloody." Both Stephen and Benji recoiled in disgust. "What? I like my meat rare." "Not going there. Way too easy." "You?" Stephen asked. "What about my sides?" Mary asked. "Darling, out of fear of french fries and peas, I'll just handle the finer details, okay?" He smiled and returned to Benji. "And you, good sir." Stephen turned as he was about to order, cupped his memo pad to his chest, and greeted two women dressed in jumpsuits, pulling out the chairs at an adjacent table. "Ma'am, the hostess will seat you up front." "Janis." "This'll do quite nicely, thank you," Janis replied, using a stark "don't you mess with me" tone as she hoped would assert her unwillingness to cooperate with the snotty waiter. He wasn't a stranger to her, nor she to him, and their relationship was one of forced civility. Janis would offer no such amenity today. Both women had to steady themselves once they entered Tweeds. At first, Janis thought the combination of hunger and the lack of sleep had finally taken its toll. She expected to wake in a hospital bed, or worse, passed out in the middle of a road with Madeline watching over her. The dizziness passed, leaving a lingering sensation of undeniable proximity to something she considered valuable, or at the very least consequential. One scan of the restaurant's patrons suggested they were on the right path. Deep in the dining room, at a table nearest the kitchen, sat two youngsters, a boy and a girl. The boy caught her attention immediately. His outer appearance seemed awkward and homely, like a kid on his first date. He fidgeted, his eyes flicked between his drink, the floor, and the table. Anywhere but in the eyes of the girl sitting across from him. Inside, however, told a much different story. It was as if the kid's chest glowed with a fire. A beacon, she supposed. Much like a summoning balefire lit explicitly for her. All the tiny hairs on her neck jumped to attention, and her legs began working on their own. Before she realized she was moving, Janis and Madeline took a seat beside the two. "It's the kids, right?" Madeline whispered. She made no effort to curb her excitement or divert her attention away from the two teens sitting at the table next to him. Janis recognized the girl. It was hard not to, as she was dressed like a homeless clown. Shorts over shiny pants or ripped denim over leather, almost always covering something else. The kid's mother was as flamboyant as the girl, though opposite on the same trashy spectrum. A tramp was an apt description, and her father was nothing short of a full-time criminal. The boy, however familiar, didn't strike her as someone she knew. She'd seen him around town, but she couldn't place the face. Quite possibly one of the Commons cave dwellers, but she couldn't pinpoint where on Dilthy Street he might live. Oh, yes, it's the kid, all right. Balefire's singing. The boy, not the girl. Madeline looked at her questioningly. Janis shrugged. That's what it feels like, right? Not just a gut feeling it's like. We're being pulled to it, Mary finished. She nodded, adding, Yes, I can see it. Kind of catchy in a way, ain't it? She raised and wiggled her fingers, moaning, Balefire! Ma'am, you really need to check in. Oh, stuff it, Stephen. Bring me 2 menus and some water. Vodka, Madeline quickly added, then covered her mouth when the restaurant hushed momentarily. With cranberry, she said, wide-eyed and nodding. Janis, please, do you have any idea of the headache you're about to cause me? Stephen asked. He glanced back at the 2 teens, watching the exchange of words curiously. They go way back, Madeline assured the girl, like 2 ladies in waiting. Madeline, please, Janis protested. I always did like you, Madeline, Stephen offered with a smile. Vodka cranberry for the lady, water for the crow. Madeline stretched out a hand and introduced herself to the teens. Hi, I'm Madeline. Mary and Benji, the girl replied and shook her hand. This is Janis. We know, the boy replied. Janis raised a brow, locking eyes with the teen. To his credit, he held her gaze for a few moments, even offered a brief sneer before looking away. They always looked away. A name quickly manifested, and Janis nodded. I thought I recognized you. You live on Dilthy, am I right? Single mom, runs a cigar shop up the way? Stackhouse Sam Smokery, he replied. Yes, you're Samantha's boy. How is your mother? Doing well? Tapping Tweedle, Mary offered. No, Madeline said with a gasp. Tweeds, Tweedle? Seriously? She thought for a moment. I didn't think the old bore had it in him. The boy turned to his companion with a look of dismay. Janis could see the hurt well within, and all his girlfriend could do was shrug an apology. Janis watched as the 2 silently argued. Teens, always with their drama. The boy mouthed the word why. She replied in a whisper. He crossed his arms. She raised hers dismissively over her head. Janis watched in befuddled fascination. All the while, the balefire raged within the boy. Yet beyond an inescapable urge to be in this particular place, sitting at this specific table staring at these 2 particular children, she had no idea why. What was the purpose? And what the hell did they have to do with the stone? Janis reached inwards, searching for a hidden note or perhaps a sign of impending doom. There was nothing except a bit of a tug in her gut saying, He's here, he's the bright light tugging at your tummy. End message. Madeline must sense this as well, for she turned to Janis and raised both hands in surrender. She leaned in to converse, and Madeline raised a hand, pointing over Janis' shoulder. Hi, welcome back, Stephen said with a smile. You're still here? Yes, I'm like a flea on a mangy old dog, Stephen said thoughtfully. Speaking of drinks, anything besides water? Oh, my vodka, Madeline exclaimed. With cranberry, Stephen replied with equal vigor. Stephen, just give us what they're having minus the fries, and bring me a double scotch on the rocks. Well, our little family of friends over here are having porterhouse, rare, and medium rare. I don't like mine raw like that, the boy protested. Stephen turned sharply, ran a finger over his lips, telling the boy to zip it, then reiterated. Medium rare, baked potato, all the trimmings, and mixed veggies. Good for you, my queen. Yes, fine. Just go do something. Madeline leaned close. So now what? I thought we were supposed to find the rock. Janis furrowed her brow. That's a good point. She turned to the table next to her, waved until she caught the attention of the teens, then asked, Either you have a rock on you? About so big? Janis displayed her fingers about 4 inches apart. Ugly smile painted on the front. The girl shook her head. The boy, on the other hand, didn't respond. His eyes darted to the left, right, then down at the table. He was avoiding eye contact and making little effort to hide it. Not only has this kid seen the stone, but she would also bet he's the one who threw the blasted thing in the first place. You, Janis asked, waving her hand in a mock gesture to see if he was paying attention to her. He met her eyes. You know what I'm talking about, don't you? Benji, was it? Leave me alone, lady. He lowered his head and turned away from her. Janis leaned into her chair. Madeline reached for her hands, and she waved her away. No, the hook's in the cod, and the water's about to boil. That was you, wasn't it? She seethed in a whisper. You're the one who threw that stone at me. Her voice rose sharply in a pitch much higher than she intended, causing the mixed conversation of patrons and staff to dwindle to a murmur. Madeline gasped and began to clap excitedly. Oh, how she wished Madeline would learn to stifle her emotions. Admit it! I don't know what you're talking about, the boy retorted, his volume equal to Janis. Seriously, lady, you need to chill. We just came in here to eat, the girlfriend stated coldly. Oh, shut up, you hussy, Janis growled, losing control of her wits when she put one and one together. The boy, the stone, the pole, and this restaurant. All of it was connected, and she was going to find out how. All eyes in the room suddenly turned to the fore, staring in bewilderment silence. Fuck you, lady. The girl took to her heels and loomed over Janis. She ignored her, pounded her fists on the edge of the table, and repeated, Admit it! Janis, come on, sister. You're getting way too worked up over this, Madeline said. She turned to the girl, Mary, and waved her hand dismissively. We haven't slept. She whirled on Madeline, raised a finger, rage building at an uncontrollable rate, and growled, Stop! Stop, or I'll tear your fucking arms off! Well, to my absolute surprise, the deep voice of Larry Tweedle echoed, Benji fucking Watson. Benji. Benji, what the heck is going on? Mary whispered. She, like Benji, saw the woman's escalation from curiosity to all-out fury downright frightening. I don't know. All this arguing over a damn rock he tossed away a few days ago was beyond ridiculous. Benji hadn't considered where the damn thing landed once it hopped from view, and he didn't care. There was no way it could have reached this dim-witted woman who lived over 3 blocks away. Images of the moment Benji discovered the stone whizzed past his mind's eye, including the boots, the champagne flutes, and the painted rock. He recalled his desire to throw the thing through the living room window. Revisiting the idea caused a rebellious, gleeful, and euphoric willingness to lash out and strike each of them down, Larry included, to resurface. Anger quickly replaced guilt. Benji tensed, and he told himself in a romantic musical chant, Don't do it. Not worth it. She's not your friend. He turned to Mary and hoped she could ground him. Janis continued her barrage of accusations, which, to her detriment, included Mary. Once the name-calling began in earnest, Mary stood, balled her fists, and readied herself for the first physical strike. So when Larry approached to intervene, even if he directed his ire at him, Benji welcomed the interruption. Janis calmed, and Mary sat back down. You two little shits spying on me? Larry asked, smiling. Stay out of this, Tweedle, Janis seethed. She leaned forward and groped for Benji's hand. He jerked it away and exclaimed in a cracked, nervous cry, Hey, stop it, lady! What the hell? Madame, I'll have you not molest my young customers on this fine evening, thank you. Larry leaned close to Mary and whispered, We saved that for Fridays. Janis sat back. She appeared to soften when Madeline took her hand while apologizing to Larry and Mary. She said nothing to Benji. Maybe we should go, Mary suggested. Not a bad idea. Holy Jesus, this woman was scary mad. No question. Benji wanted to run out the front door and pedal like the wind straight to his doorstep and never cross paths with this crazy bitch again. The look in her eyes was maddening and desperate. When she reached for him, it felt like she was trying to push him away. Benji might have spun about in a full circle if he wasn't sitting. He didn't think he needed to touch him to do it physically. He didn't think she needed to touch him to do it physically. Larry pulled a chair between Janis and Benji, crossed his legs, then scrutinized the 4 of them. Stephen arrived moments later and dropped the ladies' drinks on their table. He quickly retreated as Madeline upended the glass, but not before mouthing, Run! As he passed by Larry. Now what are you rambling on about, Janis? Is this really over a fucking rock? I didn't do anything, Benji assured Larry. Mary, bless her heart, nodded in agreement. Yes, Larry, a rock. One this little turd threw at me. I didn't throw any rocks. God, lady, where are you getting this from? All right, calm down, both of you. I don't need you scaring off the seniors. Hard enough to convince these relics to come back every year. I swear I didn't throw a rock, Mr. Tweedle. I barely know her. Janice's eyes narrowed and she grit her teeth. I love your place, Larry, Madeline said. She lifted Janice's rock glass and toast, then downed the drink in a single swallow. Larry thanked her, glanced at Janice, then leaned close, whispering in Benji's ear. Son, I don't know what you did to this woman, but I suggest getting the fuck out of here while you can. Benji meant to argue, again reaffirm his innocence, as he genuinely believed he was blameless here. It was you, Janice hissed. Now, Janice, Larry cautioned. Benji, maybe we should go. You, Janice continued. Everything points to you. I want it, Benjamin Watson. She waved her hand from her chest to Madeline, who nodded enthusiastically and added, We need it. Do you have the fucking rock? Larry asked. Benji shook his head. He turned. See? They don't have the goddamn rock. Now shut up and enjoy your dinner. Janice lunged, her face contorted into a raging snarl. She screamed, circled Larry, and raised her hands in an apparent attempt to strangle Benji. Benji squeaked and crossed his arms. Janice roared, pressing past Larry's extended arm, her fingers madly flexing, her hands an inch from his throat. The skin beneath his chin folded into a tight band around his Adam's apple. Air was pulled from his lungs, and his head snapped back. Benji was punched from his chair. The world around him sped by in a blur. He flew over the adjacent table, and time suddenly slowed. He caught sight of Janice flying in the opposite direction. Her legs kicked above her head while she continuously clawed for Benji. Another blur flew his mind into a dizzying spin. A glimpse of the wall flashed quickly by, followed by one of Mary as she screamed his name. Larry slowly crossed his arms and frowned. Shards of glass exploded around Benji, pricking and stinging the nape of his neck and peppering his entire back. Droplets of his own blood hovered as if weightless in the void of space. White flashed, his head snapped forward, and unconsciousness threatened to blanket control. Heat, overwhelming and wicked, enveloped his body. Benji's momentum shifted. Walls rose, grew, and vanished in hot bursts of sparks and flame. Color wrapped his mind like a cocoon, crimson blending into orange, then orange to black. He landed on the cold pavement outside the restaurant. Smoke seeped off his body in thread-thin worms. He forced his eyes open long enough to see the flames burst angrily from the windows, licking feverishly at the splintered remains of the awning above the entryway. He called for Mary, but found he could barely speak beyond a whisper. Screams filled the night air. Benji felt the ground quake as the restaurant emptied, and just moments before darkness took him, the repelling pressure returned and forced him back to the ground. Janice Mayfair stood above him. She no longer appeared angry, only cold and indifferent. Janice knelt beside him, and Benji moaned when his insides wrapped around his spine. It felt like she dropped an anvil on his chest and then stood upon it. Fire's got you, Benjamin Watson, she said absently. The balefire has fiercely hooked you. She glanced back at the restaurant. It's a shame it had to come to this, whatever this is. She appeared to have wanted to say more, but suddenly fell to the ground beside him. Both of their bodies slid in opposite directions and did not stop until the darkness drowned out the light. And that is November 4th. Thank you, everybody, for continuing to take this journey with me. This is the Stitches on the Stone, written by Christopher J. Finn, read by me, hi, and produced and all that other fun stuff by me because I can't afford it to hire somebody. So I hope you enjoy it. Tune in next week where we will hit the next chapter, and I hope you guys have a wonderful, wonderful, wonderful day. See ya.